Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're the show that helps you cut through all the noise and get straight to the really important insights from leading research.
Great to be here.
Today, we're plunging into something that feels more relevant than ever. It's about how to escape that really brutal, sometimes bloody reality of what's called a red ocean.
That's right. I mean, just picture a market where, everyone's fighting tooth and nail over the same shrinking pie.
Yeah.
Products start looking the same, they become commodities, prices just plummet, and profits, well, they shrink or evaporate. It's like a sea just stained red with the blood of all that competition.
Yeah.
And we see this everywhere, right? Critical industries like healthcare, education, financial services. Demands are sky high, budgets are constantly squeezed. It really is a race to the bottom. Nobody truly wins in that scenario.
Oof, a race to the bottom. That definitely resonates. And, for so long, innovation has felt like this sort of elusive, almost accidental thing, like a random stroke of genius, a total black box. So the big question we're tackling today is, how can organizations actually break free from this relentless competition? How can they unlock new, profitable growth, not just tiny, incremental gains?
And that's exactly what this deep dive is all about. We're going to unpack the core ideas from the Blue Ocean Strategy Framework. And the key thing is, it's not just a theory.
Yeah.
It's really a systematic approach designed to help organizations unlock strategic creativity and, crucially, create entirely new market spaces, places where competition just becomes irrelevant. It's a fundamental shift in how you even think about strategy.
So think of this deep dive as maybe your shortcut to being genuinely well-informed about how some of the world's most surprising and successful innovations actually happened. We'll share some insights that might just flip your perspective, offering hopefully some actionable takeaways you can apply to your own work.
Absolutely.
So let's start right at the beginning. What exactly is a red ocean versus a blue ocean? Can you walk us through that distinction?
Sure. So a red ocean, that basically refers to all the industries that exist today. This is the known market space, right? Established boundaries, competitive rules, everyone knows and plays by.
Oh, okay.
Companies in these red oceans, they're constantly trying to outperform their rivals, usually with incremental improvements, just to grab a bigger slice of the existing demand.
Right, like making your detergent slightly better or your toothpaste whiter.
Exactly. And when that market gets crowded, which it inevitably does, products become commodities, and that cutthroat competition turns the ocean, well, bloody. You're fighting for every single inch.
It's that feeling where brands start to look and feel so similar that, buyers just end up picking based on price. Like maybe Tide is on sale this week or Crest has a coupon.
Precisely. There's just not much to differentiate, and you're forced to compete on cost or maybe tiny feature tweaks.
Okay, so that's the red ocean. What's the blue ocean then?
A blue ocean is fundamentally different. It represents industries that don't exist today. It's the unknown market space. These are characterized by untapped demand, the creation of entirely new demand, and the chance for really profitable growth because, at least for a while, you have the market pretty much to yourself.
Okay.
Now, what's really fascinating is that while some blue oceans emerge way out there, far beyond existing industry boundaries, most are actually created by expanding within current red oceans.
Oh, interesting. How?
Simply by redefining those boundaries and challenging the accepted wisdom, the industry norms.
This sounds, well, almost too good to be true sometimes.
Yeah.
We've always been told innovation is this sort of random, elusive thing, right? Often credited to that lone creative entrepreneur like Joseph Schumpeter talked about.
It's a myth of the lone genius.
Right. So is strategic creativity really a science? Can it actually be systematized, not just a black box?
That's a great question. And our research strongly suggests it's not a black box when it comes to strategic creativity. Now, artistic or scientific breakthroughs, sure, those might be more random. Think Gaudi's art or Marie Curie discovering radium. But strategic creativity, the kind that drives value innovation and opens up new market spaces, well, it tends to follow common patterns. It's not just pure luck.
So you're saying it wasn't just that Ford got lucky with the Model T or Salesforce.com just happened to be in the right place at the right time. There was a method behind it.
Precisely. These patterns allowed us to develop analytical frameworks and tools, things like the strategy canvas, the 6 paths we'll get into, that systematically link innovation to actual value.
Yep.
They help reconstruct industry boundaries and do it in a way that maximizes opportunity while, importantly, minimizing risk. These tools bring structure to what's historically been a pretty unstructured problem and strategy. They give you a roadmap for thinking differently.
That's a huge shift, moving from just hope to a systematic approach. And speaking of companies, you focus on strategic moves rather than just the company or the industry itself when analyzing blue ocean creation.
Yeah.
Why that distinction? Why is the move the right unit of analysis?
That's a really critical distinction, and it's where a lot of people, I think, misinterpret the longevity of innovation. Our study shows that the strategic move, which is basically the set of managerial actions and decisions involved in creating a major market-creating business offering, that's the right unit of analysis.
Okay.
It helps explain blue ocean creation and sustained high performance much better. It's about the action that creates the new space, not just the company that happened to make it.
So you're saying a company might not last forever, maybe it gets acquired, but its specific strategic moves could reshape the market for decades.
Oh, wow.
And that's a powerful and often overlooked point.
Exactly right. Take Compaq, for example.
Yeah.
Acquired by HP back in 2001, no longer independent. Some might call that unsuccessful in the long run.
Sure.
But that doesn't negate the huge blue ocean strategic moves Compaq made when it basically created the server industry in the mid-90s. Those moves fueled Compaq's comeback at the time, and they unlocked a massive multi-billion-dollar market space in computing that's still here today, long after Compaq the company is gone.
Yeah.
Companies rise and fall, but those powerful strategic moves can truly reshape the market for everyone.
Okay, now that we understand what a blue ocean is and why we look at these strategic moves, let's dive into the how. The 6 paths to blue ocean creation. This is where it starts to get really interesting, I think, seeing how these seemingly unrelated innovations might share some common DNA.
Indeed. And the core concept here is something called value innovation.
Value innovation, okay.
It's about simultaneously driving costs down and driving value up for buyers. It's this convergence. It's not just about fancy technology for its own sake or simply being the first mover. Lots of tech pioneers actually lay the eggs that other companies later hatch.
Huh?
Value innovation happens when you align that innovation with utility, price, and your cost positions. You create such a leap in value that the competition just becomes irrelevant.
So it's connecting innovation directly to what buyers truly value and will pay for while also keeping your own costs down. Kind of like getting a gourmet meal for fast food prices, in a way.
That's a decent analogy, yeah. It's about breaking the value-cost trade-off.
Okay, so where do we start looking for these opportunities? The first path is look across alternative industries. What does that mean in practice?
Well, companies usually get tunnel vision, right? They compete within their defined industry box.
Yeah.
But buyers often choose between alternatives from completely different industries to get the same job done or achieve the same objective. For instance, if you want, say, 2 hours of self-indulgence, you might go to the movies, get a massage, read a book at a cafe.
Right, totally different industries providing a similar feeling.
Exactly. But sellers often don't consciously think about those trade-offs buyers are making across these alternative industries. And the space between those alternatives, that's ripe with opportunity for new value creation.
Okay, this makes me think of Cirque du Soleil. They didn't just try to be a better circus, did they? They looked outside the traditional big top.
Precisely. The traditional circus was, frankly, declining, competing fiercely for kids and families, relying on animal acts, star performers, escalating costs.
Yeah, the Ringling Bros
Yeah.
kind of model.
Right. Cirque du Soleil didn't really compete with Ringling Bros at all.
Yeah.
They looked at the alternatives people chose for a sophisticated night out. Live theater, Broadway shows, opera.
Ah.
And they blended elements from the traditional circus, the tent, the amazing acrobatics, the clowns, but fused it with the sophistication of theater, storylines, intellectual richness, original music, dance, and crucially, they eliminated the costly stuff like animal acts and star performers. That saved a ton of money.
Right.
This created a whole new form of entertainment that appealed mainly to adults, the kind of people who typically went to Broadway or the opera, not the traditional circus, and the result. In less than 20 years, Cirque achieved revenue levels that took Ringling Bros over a century to reach. They essentially redefined circus for a whole new demographic.
That's incredible. And NetJets is another great example you mentioned, looking across alternatives.
Yes, NetJets created the blue ocean of fractional jet ownership. They looked at corporate travelers who basically had 2 main choices back then.
Okay, what were they?
Either fly first class on commercial airlines or buy their own corporate jet. Both had big drawbacks.
Right. Commercial first class means hassle, security lines, limited airports.
And owning your own jet. Huge upfront purchase price, massive fixed costs maintaining a flight department, paying for empty deadhead flights.
Okay, so NetJets found the sweet spot between those two alternatives.
They really did. They let companies buy fractions of a jet, even as small as 1/16th ownership, for maybe around $400,000, plus monthly fees.
Wow.
This gave customers the convenience and speed of a private jet, access to thousands more airports, point-to-point travel, jets ready with just 4 hours notice, all at a much lower fixed cost than owning outright. And often, the total cost was even lower than flying commercial first class once you factored in executive time saved, overnight stays avoided, etc.
That's a game changer.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And NetJets still holds something like 5 times the market share of its nearest competitor in this blue ocean they created. It just shows the power of looking across those alternatives.
It's amazing how many seemingly different companies use this same thinking. You mentioned NTT Docomo, putting internet on cell phones, looking beyond just voice calls.
Right.
The Home Depot giving DIers professional expertise, bridging hardware stores and contractors. Southwest Airlines offering the speed of flying at the price of driving.
Mm-hmm.
And Intuit making Quicken as easy as using a pencil and paper for finances. It's always about finding that unmet need between the existing solutions.
Exactly. It's a powerful lens. Now, moving to path 2. Look across strategic groups within industries.
Okay, strategic groups like luxury cars versus economy cars.
Precisely. Industries often have this kind of hierarchy. Luxury brands like Mercedes, BMW, Jaguar are battling it out at the top end.
Yeah.
While economy car makers like, say, Hyundai or Kia focus on their segment, they generally compete fiercely within their own group and don't pay a whole lot of attention to the other groups, even though they're making the same basic product, a car.
All right, they stay in their lane.
But the blue ocean opportunity comes when you understand why customers trade up to the higher group or trade down to the lower one. What factors are they weighing?
Okay. So you look at the reasons for the switch, like with Curves, the women's fitness chain.
Perfect example. Before Curves, women basically had 2 main choices for fitness.
Which were?
Either traditional health clubs, often big, expensive, lots of machines, maybe pools, juice bars, and often lots of men, which wasn't comfortable for many women, especially those not already athletes.
Okay.
Or the other option was home exercise programs, videos, maybe some weights, cheap and private, sure, but lacking motivation, accountability, that social element.
Got it. So 2 distinct strategic groups with different trade-offs.
Yeah.
How did Curves bridge that? What did they eliminate or reduce?
They brilliantly targeted women who weren't really served well by either extreme. They eliminated a lot of the things these women didn't value or actively disliked. No fancy juice bars, no pools, no sprawling locker rooms, just a few curtain-changing areas. And importantly, for many, no men.
Right, that was a big one.
They focused intensely on what these women did want: convenience, privacy, a supportive, non-threatening atmosphere, and motivation.
And the workout itself was different too, wasn't it?
Very different. A simple 30-minute circuit on hydraulic resistance machines. Easy to learn, less intimidating than traditional weight stacks. And the machines were arranged in a circle, which naturally fostered conversation and social interaction.
Clever.
And all this came at a really low monthly price, maybe around $30 back then, making it accessible to a mass market of women who felt excluded by traditional gyms.
That's really smart. And I remember hearing they also dramatically cut the startup costs for franchisees, right? Which helped them grow incredibly fast.
Exactly. Startup costs were maybe $25,000 to $30,000 compared to $500,000 or even $1 million for a traditional gym.
Wow.
And their variable costs were much lower too, allowing franchisees to become profitable very quickly. It was a model built by looking across those existing strategic groups and cherry-picking or eliminating factors to create something entirely new.
Champion Enterprises did something similar with manufactured homes, right? Offering customization usually only found in site-built homes, but keeping the cost benefits of factory production.
Yes, another good example of bridging strategic groups.
Okay, path 3 is look across the chain of buyers. This one seems counterintuitive. Don't companies usually know who their buyer is?
You'd think so. But in most industries, competitors tend to converge on a common definition of the target buyer. However, there's often a whole chain of people involved in a purchase decision.
Like who?
You might have the purchaser, the one who pays. The user, the one who actually uses the product or service. And maybe influencers, people whose opinions carry weight, like doctors or experts. These different groups often define value very differently, and focusing only on one while ignoring the others can be a massive missed opportunity.
Like in the pharmaceutical industry, where the focus is almost always on the doctors, the influencers.
Exactly. For decades, the insulin industry was obsessed with making purer and purer insulin, primarily targeting doctors. Novo Nordisk, a Danish insulin producer, did something radical.
What was that?
They shifted their focus from the doctors to the users, the patients themselves. They went out and understood the patient's experience.
And what did they find?
They realized patients found the whole process of using vials and syringes really complex, kind of inconvenient, especially for frequent injections outside the home. And there was a social stigma attached, which often led to people not taking their insulin properly.
So they addressed the patient's real day-to-day emotional pain points, not just the clinical stuff the doctor cared about.
Precisely. They introduced the Novo pen, a pre-filled, disposable insulin pen. It looked kind of like a fountain pen, much more discreet, much easier to use.
Yeah, I can see how that would make a difference.
Later, they introduced the Innovo, which even had a built-in memory to track doses, reducing patient risk and worry. This focus on the user transformed Novo Nordisk from just an insulin producer into a broader diabetes care company. They absolutely came to dominate the market with this user-centric approach. It's a powerful lesson in looking beyond the obvious customer.
That's a fantastic example.
Yeah.
Changing who you think your customer is can unlock huge value. Didn't Bloomberg do something similar in the financial information space?
They certainly did. Back then, the financial information industry, think Reuters, Dow Jones, Telerate, mostly focused on the IT managers in financial firms.
The purchasers.
The purchasers, exactly. They valued things like standardized systems, easy integration, bulk discounts. But Michael Bloomberg saw things differently. He realized the real users, the traders and analysts, were the ones making or losing millions for their firms based on that information.
Right, the end users had very different needs.
Totally different. They needed information fast, and they needed to analyze it quickly, often under immense pressure. Before Bloomberg, they were literally juggling data feeds on one screen while using pencils, paper, and calculators to figure things out.
Huh. Hard to imagine now.
Right. So Bloomberg designed terminals specifically for them. Easy-to-use keyboards labeled with common financial terms, not computer codes. Dual monitors so they could see multiple data streams at once. Built-in analytical capabilities, bond calculators, equity analysis tools right there in the terminal.
So it streamlined their whole workflow.
Completely.
Yeah.
And he even added personal services through the terminal. You could order flowers, book travel, get restaurant reservations. He recognized these traders worked insane hours and had little time for personal errands. It created a whole ecosystem catering directly to the end user, not the IT manager purchaser.
Genius.
Yeah.
Just pure genius, understanding that user chain. Okay, path 4. Look across complementary product and service offerings. What's the blind spot here? What do companies usually miss?
Well, very few products or services are used in complete isolation, right? Their value is often affected by other things, complementary products or services.
Like what? Give me an example.
Think about going to the movies. The actual movie ticket is one part. But the value of that experience is also affected by, say, the hassle and cost of finding a babysitter or paying for parking downtown.
Ah, okay. Things needed to use the main product.
Exactly. But movie theaters rarely address those complementary issues because, babysitting isn't our business or parking isn't our business. That's the blind spot, ignoring the total solution the customer is trying to piece together.
That's a great point. So how did a bus manufacturer of all companies apply this? NABI, you mentioned.
Yeah, NABI in the U.S. municipal bus industry. Traditionally, bus makers competed mostly on purchase price and maybe meeting basic specifications. But NABI looked at the total picture for their buyer in the municipalities.
And what did they see?
They saw that municipalities faced huge life cycle costs for their buses, not just the purchase price, but ongoing maintenance, high fuel consumption, and major problems with corrosion, especially because buses were traditionally made of heavy steel.
Okay.
They also realized the rider experience was often pretty poor, uncomfortable seats, high steps, outdated designs.
So NABI addressed both sides, the municipality's costs and the rider's experience.
Precisely. They started building buses using lightweight fiberglass composites. This dramatically reduced corrosion, cut down on maintenance needs, and improved fuel efficiency. Now, their initial purchase price was actually higher than traditional steel buses.
Oh, interesting. So how did they sell that?
By focusing on the total life cycle cost. Over the 12-year life of the bus, municipalities would save significantly more on fuel and maintenance than the initial price difference. They also focused on the riders introducing modern, aesthetically pleasing designs, lower floors for easier boarding, more comfortable seating, fewer poles to hang on to.
And did that improve ridership?
It did. In some cities, ridership went up by as much as 30% after introducing these new buses, which of course meant more fair revenue for the municipalities. So NBI didn't just make a better bus, they made the entire bus ecosystem better for their buyer by looking at those complementary costs and experiences.
That's brilliant, thinking about the whole solution. And Philips did something similar, but maybe simpler, with tea kettles in the UK.
Yes, a much simpler example, but the same principle. The British tea kettle market was stagnant, commodity-like, shrinking profits. Philips looked beyond the kettle itself.
What did they find?
The complementary product? Tap water. In Britain, tap water often has a lot of limescale.
Right, hard water.
Exactly. That limescale builds up inside kettles and ends up floating in your cup of tea. It affects the taste, the appearance. It's just unpleasant. But kettle manufacturers traditionally ignored it. Not our problem, it's the water company's problem.
The classic blind spot.
Right. So Philips designed a kettle with a simple mesh filter over the spout that trapped the limescale as you poured. Easy to remove and clean. This small, yet highly valued innovation addressed a major annoyance related to the complementary product, revolutionized the industry, and allowed Philips to command a premium price.
Amazing what you find when you look just outside your own product box. Okay, path 5. Look across functional emotional orientation. This sounds like it's about challenging really deep-seated industry norms.
It is. Industries tend to develop an orientation. Over time, they compete primarily on functionality and price, or primarily on feelings and emotion.
Like?
Well, think about, say, cement,
Yep.
mostly functional, right? Price per ton, delivery reliability, versus perfume, almost entirely emotional. Brand image, aspiration, how it makes you feel.
Got it.
Opportunities emerge when you question and challenge this ingrained orientation. Emotionally oriented industries can often strip away costly extras that don't add much functional value, creating simpler, lower cost, more convenient models. Conversely, functionally oriented industries can sometimes inject emotion, build a brand, and stimulate new demand for products previously seen as commodities. It's about asking, does our industry have to compete this way?
So tell me about QB House, the Asian barbershop chain. I'm picturing the traditional Japanese barbershop experience, which seems very ritualistic, emotional.
You're absolutely right. The traditional Japanese barbershop was often a long, pampering ritual. Hot towels, shoulder massages, maybe some tea, meticulous service. The whole process could take an hour or more.
Sounds nice, but maybe not always practical.
Exactly. And the actual haircut itself was only a fraction of that time and cost. The price might be, say, $27 to $45 equivalent. QB House looked at this highly emotional service and stripped almost everything away.
What did they focus on?
Pure function. A haircut, that's it. No wash, no blow dry, no massage, no hot towels, no booking appointments. You buy a ticket from a vending machine. Wait a few minutes. They have traffic lights outside showing wait times. Get a 10-minute haircut using specialized tools. They vacuum away the loose hairs, and you're done.
Wow, that's efficient.
Highly efficient. And the cost. Around $9. It appealed massively to busy professionals, students, people just wanting a quick, decent trim without the time commitment or the cost of the traditional emotional experience. They completely inverted the industry's orientation from emotional to purely functional.
A total flip.
Yeah.
So how did iTunes use this path, but go in the other way, shifting from functional to emotional?
Well, think about the digital music landscape before iTunes. It was largely functional and often, frankly, illegal or quasi-legal.
Right, Napster, Kazaa, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Downloads were often poor quality, searching was clunky, viruses were a risk. It was functional in that you could get music, but it wasn't a great experience. And it certainly wasn't emotionally appealing in a positive way for most people.
Okay.
Apple, working with the major music labels, infused emotion, legality, and supreme convenience into this space. They offered legal, high-quality downloads, an easy-to-use interface. Flexible a la carte, purchasing 99 cents for just the song you wanted, maybe $9.99 for the whole album.
Which addressed that huge annoyance of having to buy a whole CD for one or two good tracks.
Exactly. They made it feel fair, easy, and even kind of cool. They provided superior sound quality, intuitive search, and organization via the iTunes software. Apple essentially took a functional, somewhat illicit, and often frustrating activity and turned it into an easy, appealing legal experience. They added emotional value to a functional commodity.
It really did shift things, making digital music desirable and accessible in a way it wasn't before.
Eh.
Okay, the final path, path 6. Look across time trends. How do you spot opportunities here? It sounds like more than just reacting to headlines.
It's definitely more than just reacting. This path involves identifying trends that are decisive, irreversible, and have a clear trajectory. You need to project how these trends will fundamentally change value for customers and impact your industry's business model down the line.
So not just fleeting fads, but major shifts.
Right. And you don't just passively observe the trend, you actively think about how to shape the market and offer unprecedented value in light of that trend, ideally before it becomes blindingly obvious to everyone else. It requires foresight, not just hindsight.
Like Cisco systems during the early internet boom, it
Yeah,
must have looked like pure chaos to some people.
it probably did. But Cisco saw the clear, decisive trend, an exploding demand for high-speed data exchange. They also saw the major problem this trend was creating, the inability of different computer networks to talk to each other easily.
The incompatibility issue.
Exactly. With internet usage doubling something like every 100 days back then, this problem was only going to get exponentially worse. So Cisco didn't just ride the wave. They designed routers and switches that offered breakthrough value by solving that core problem. They provided fast, seamless data exchange in networked environments. Their innovation wasn't just new tech. It was linking that tech directly to solving a critical pain point amplified by a massive, irreversible trend.
They provided the essential plumbing for the internet age, basically.
In a way, yes. And Salesforce.com did something similar in the CRM software world, didn't they? That used to be dominated by huge, complex on-premise installations. Yes, absolutely. Salesforce saw the clear trend towards web-based solutions and, maybe just as importantly, the growing discomfort among companies with managing large, complex, expensive IT infrastructure.
Right, the old Siebel or SAP model.
Exactly. Traditional CRM software was notoriously expensive, took ages to install and customize, was often difficult for salespeople to actually use, and required constant, costly maintenance and upgrades. It was inaccessible for many smaller companies.
So Salesforce saw the trend and the pain point.
They did. They created a blue ocean by offering CRM purely as a web-based service, software as a service, or SaaS. They focused initially on the core functionalities salespeople actually needed. It worked pretty much instantly upon subscription, high reliability, you could access it from anywhere, and crucially, it was available at a fraction of the cost of the traditional packaged software, usually on a per-user, per-month basis.
Which opened it up to a whole new market.
A massive market. Small and medium-sized businesses that had previously been non-customers of the CRM industry because they simply couldn't afford or manage the old model suddenly had access. Salesforce leveraged the trend towards the web to solve major customer pain points around cost, complexity, and accessibility.
So it's really about anticipating the impact of a trend on what customers will need and value in the future, not just spotting the trend itself, and then building a solution for that future state.
That's a great way to put it.
Wow. That's a lot of ground we've covered with these 6 paths. Each one feels like it requires a completely different way of looking at the world, a different mindset shift.
They do, but they all share that common goal: breaking free from the red ocean by reconstructing market boundaries.
Okay, we've talked about the 6 paths for creating blue oceans, which is fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
But creation is only half the battle, right?
Yeah.
You also need to execute these strategies and make them stick, make them sustainable.
Absolutely. A brilliant idea on paper is worthless if you can't bring the organization along and make it happen profitably.
So let's talk about the 4 steps of visualizing strategy. This sounds like an approach designed to get beyond just numbers and spreadsheets, which often fail to really motivate people.
You've hit on a key issue there. So much strategic planning gets bogged down in number crunching, analyzing spreadsheets, and often it just leads to companies making tiny, incremental improvements within their existing red ocean. They get stuck.
Yeah, tweaking the status quo.
Exactly. This visual approach is designed to do the opposite. It aims to build collective wisdom across the management team, encourage genuine big-picture thinking, and crucially, build commitment and motivation for implementation. It's about building the strategy around a picture, making it tangible. As Aristotle apparently said, the soul never thinks without an image.
Okay, I like that. Making it real and visceral. So what's step 1? Visual awakening. How do you get everyone to really see the current reality, even if it's, well, painful?
This step tackles a really common mistake, trying to discuss strategy changes before everyone even agrees on what the current strategy is and how it's performing.
Right. People might have very different views.
Very different. And executives, especially if their own unit seems okay, can be reluctant to accept the need for radical change. So what we found works is asking managers, individually or in teams, to draw their company's current value curve, how it invests across the key factors of competition, and then compare it directly to their top competitors' curves.
Ouch. That sounds like it could be a brutal exercise.
It often is. It can be genuinely painful, but it's incredibly necessary. It acts as a powerful, undeniable wake-up call.
You used the example of EFS, a company struggling with a muddled strategy. What did that visual awakening show them?
Right. EFS was a European financial services company, and they were deeply divided internally. Different departments had different priorities, different ideas about what mattered. When their senior managers drew their current value curves, the picture was stark.
What did it look like?
A serious lack of focus. They were investing across a whole range of factors, but without clear differentiation on any of them. And worse, their curve looked almost identical to their main competitors. Classic Me Too strategy.
Stuck in the red ocean.
Deep in it. They couldn't even agree on a compelling tagline that made them unique. And then seeing their strongest competitor, Clear Skies, which had a very focused, unique, and rapidly growing strategy curve, well, that provided direct visual evidence of their own shortcomings. That comparison hit harder and made a stronger case for change than any spreadsheet full of numbers ever could. It created a real desire to rethink everything.
Okay, so after that possibly painful awakening, where do you send managers for step 2? Visual exploration. This isn't just sitting in a room brainstorming, is it?
Definitely not. This is about getting managers out of the office and into the field, sending them to observe firsthand how real people, customers, lost customers, even non-customers experience their products or services or the alternatives. The mantra here is never outsource your eyes.
Right. See it for yourself.
Exactly. Michael Bloomberg, again, understood this instinctively. Before he created his terminals, he didn't just read market research reports. He spent time on trading floors, watching traders struggle with multiple screens, paper, pencils, calculators. It was obvious they needed integrated tools.
That direct observation makes a difference. And EFS, the financial company, had a similar kind of revelation when they went into the field. It probably challenged some long-held beliefs.
Oh, absolutely. Their field research completely overturned many assumptions. For instance, they'd always prided themselves on their account relationship managers, thinking customers really valued those personal relationships.
Well, they didn't.
Turns out, customers kind of hated wasting time talking to them. They saw the relationship managers more as relationship savers, people they had to call when EFS messed something up. Yeah. Instead, the most valued factor, something only one manager had even suggested initially, turned out to be speedy confirmation of transactions. Customers were spending way too much time on the phone just confirming payments had gone through. That direct observation was transformative because it showed them the true pain points, not the ones they assumed were important based on internal biases.
Wow. Okay, so after seeing the harsh reality and exploring those deeper customer needs, what happens in step 3? Visual strategy fair. This sounds like where the creativity really happens.
It is. Here, the teams go back to the drawing board, armed with insights from the awakening and exploration phases. Their task is to develop proposals for a new strategy. And importantly, each team has to draw multiple potential new value curves, maybe 6 or so, using the 6 paths framework we talked about earlier.
So they're forced to think beyond just one option.
Exactly. And each proposed strategy needs a compelling tagline that captures its essence. This pushes them to break conventional thinking, really differentiate, and clearly articulate the proposed value.
What did EFS come up with? You mentioned their tagline was powerful.
They did. After presenting and getting feedback on various options at their strategy fair, they converged on a really compelling one. The FedEx of corporate foreign exchange, easy, reliable, fast, and trackable.
That's instantly understandable. How did their new strategy curve reflect that?
Their new strategy involved eliminating the emphasis on relationship management and drastically reducing investment in those costly account executives. Instead, they heavily emphasized ease of use, security, accuracy, and speed, achieved largely through computerization and allowing customers to input data directly online, which was radical then compared to the industry's fax-based norm.
Right.
This move effectively collapsed their separate separate online and traditional businesses into one streamlined, compelling offering. It also greatly simplified their internal operations and freed up significant resources.
Okay, makes sense. And the final step, step 4, visual communication.
Yeah,
This must be about getting everyone in the company on board, not just the senior team who went through the process.
precisely. Once that future strategy is set and visualized, it needs to be communicated effectively throughout the entire organization in a way that every single employee can understand and internalize. You can't execute what you don't understand.
How did EFS do that? Did they just email out the new curve?
They were smarter than that. They created a simple one-page picture showing both their old unfocused strategic profile and their new focused FedEx profile. It clearly showed what they were stopping, reducing, raising, and creating.
A before and after snapshot.
Exactly. And they distributed this picture widely. Apparently, employees were so energized and motivated by this clear game plan that many actually pinned it up in their cubicles as a daily reminder of where the company was headed.
That's buy-in.
That's real buy-in. And crucially, that picture became the reference point for all major decisions, especially investment decisions. If a proposed IT project, for example, didn't clearly help move EFS towards that new value curve, it was questioned or denied. It ensured clarity, alignment, and accountability right down the line.
That's a really practical, tangible way to build and communicate strategy. Now, let's dig a bit deeper into one of the concepts you touched on earlier. Reaching beyond existing demand by looking at the 3 tiers of non-customers. This feels like where huge, often overlooked potential lies.
It absolutely is. This is often where the most significant blue ocean opportunities are hiding, yet so many companies just don't really understand or engage with non-customers.
Why is that?
Well, the common practice is to focus relentlessly on existing customers, trying to retain them, increase share of wallet, maybe segment them even more finely.
Right, fighting over the known customers.
Exactly. And this intense competition for existing demand can lead companies to target tinier and tinier niche markets. You end up fighting over crumbs, basically. The real key to unlocking massive new demand often lies in shifting your focus outwards towards the non-customers and specifically looking for commonalities across them, not just their differences.
Yeah. Commonalities across non-customers. What are these 3 tiers you talk about?
So the first tier, the closest to your current market, are the soon-to-be non-customers.
Soon to be.
Yeah. These are people who currently use your industry's offerings, but only minimally. They're just kind of getting by, maybe out of necessity. They sit on the edge of the market, ready to jump ship the moment a better alternative appears. As this group grows, the market stagnates, but it holds this huge ocean of untapped demand right there. They're technically in your market, but barely hanging on.
Okay, like people dissatisfied, but without a better option yet.
Yeah.
You mentioned Pret a Manger, the sandwich chain, tapping into this tier.
Perfect example. Before Pret came along in the UK and other European cities, busy professionals needing lunch often defaulted to sit-down restaurants, which took too long, or maybe grabbed unhealthy fast food.
Or skipped lunch entirely.
Or skipped lunch. Concerns about healthy eating are rising, time was tight. These people were soon to be non-customers of the traditional lunch options. Pret a Manger tapped directly into this tier by offering high-quality, fresh sandwiches and salads made right there in the shop that day using good ingredients, healthy options. And crucially, they made the experience incredibly fast. Instead of the usual queue, order, pay, wait, receive, sit down cycle of fast food or cafes.
Yeah, that takes time.
Pret had a browse the chiller, pick up what you want, pay quickly and leave model. Customers were in and out in literally 90 seconds on average. This combination of freshness, health, and speed revolutionized the British lunch market by capturing those dissatisfied, soon-to-be non-customer.
Brilliant. Okay, that's the first tier. What's the second tier?
The second tier consists of refusing non-customers. These are people who have consciously seen your industry's offering as an option, considered it, and actively chosen against it. They've voted no.
Okay, they know about it but don't want it, like Callaway Golf and the Big Bertha Club.
Exactly. Think about golf before the Big Bertha. Many athletic people, maybe the country club tennis crowd, for example, actively refused to take up golf. Why? Primarily because hitting the ball consistently well was perceived as just too difficult. It required immense hand-eye coordination, lessons, practice. It was frustrating for novices. Golf was just too hard for them to enjoy. They refused the offering.
So how did the Big Bertha change that?
Callaway designed the Big Bertha driver with a radically oversized club head. This larger sweet spot made it significantly easier for average golfers, and especially beginners, to hit the ball squarely, get it airborne, and have more fun.
It lowered the barrier to entry.
Dramatically. It not only converted many of those refusing non-customers into golfers, bringing new players into the game, but it also delighted existing golfers who were often frustrated with their own lack of progress. It became a massive bestseller across the board because it addressed a common frustration shared by both refusing non-customers and existing customers, the difficulty of the game. It made golf more accessible and enjoyable for a much wider audience.
Okay, makes sense. And the third tier. These are the furthest away, right?
Right. The third tier is the unexplored non-customers. These are people who are the furthest away from your current market. Their needs have typically been assumed to belong to completely different markets, or perhaps haven't even been considered as needs your industry could address. And they're essentially off everyone's radar.
Like tooth whitening. That used to be something only dentists did. Right, it probably never occurred to toothpaste companies.
Exactly. For decades, tooth whitening was seen purely as a professional dental procedure. Oral care companies like P&G or Colgate never really considered these unexplored non-customers who wanted whiter teeth but wouldn't go to a dentist for it due to cost or inconvenience.
But then they did look.
Yes. And when they did, they discovered this huge latent demand. They also realized they had the capability to develop safe, effective, relatively low-cost tooth whitening solutions, strips, special toothpastes, gels that could be sold directly to consumers through retail channels. This tapped into that massive pool of unexplored non-customers and created an entirely new multi-billion-dollar category in oral care.
Wow. Another example you mentioned was the Joint Strike Fighter, JSF, program in the military. How does that fit?
Well, think about the U.S. defense industry before the JSF. Aircraft costs were soaring, budgets were shrinking. Military leaders were genuinely worried about being able to afford replacing their aging fighter fleets across different branches: Air Force, Navy, Marines.
So they were kind of in a red ocean, each branch competing for limited defense dollars for their specific needs.
Precisely. Each branch had traditionally developed its own aircraft with unique requirements. The JSF program took a radical approach. It sought to unify the distinct needs of the Air Force, needing conventional takeoff landing, the Marines, needing short takeoff vertical landing, and the Navy, needing carrier-capable aircraft, into a single basic airframe design with common components.
That sounds incredibly difficult.
Technically very challenging, yes. But despite their differences, the program focused on the commonalities. All branches needed a next-generation fighter that was high performance, but also significantly lower cost to acquire and operate than previous generations. By aggregating this previously fragmented demand from these unexplored, from a unified perspective, customer groups, they aimed to achieve massive economies of scale in production and support.
Creating a huge new program by looking across previously separate needs.
Exactly. It became the largest military contract in history at the time. The key principle here, whether it's tooth whitening or fighter jets, is to look for those commonalities across the non-customer tiers and go for the largest catchment area you can realistically serve. That's often where the truly massive blue oceans lie hidden.
That's a really profound way to think about market expansion, looking outwards at who isn't buying and why. Okay, next, let's get practical about profitability. Getting the strategic sequence right. You've used the paths, maybe found a great blue ocean idea targeting non-customers. How do you make sure it's actually a viable, profitable business, not just a cool idea that flops?
This is absolutely critical. A great idea isn't enough. It has to be commercially viable. We identified a crucial four-step sequence that successful blue ocean creators tend to follow: buyer utility, price, cost, and adoption.
Utility, price, cost, adoption.
Okay. You need to rigorously assess your idea against each of these in that order. Does it offer truly exceptional utility or value for buyers? Is it priced strategically to attract the mass of target buyers? Can you produce it at a target cost that ensures healthy profit margins at that strategic price? And finally, have you addressed the adoption hurdles, the potential fears or resistance from stakeholders?
And if you miss one of these steps,
If you fail at any one of these steps, your blue ocean potential can evaporate very quickly. The idea might fail to launch, or if it does, it might be easily imitated or unsustainable, quickly turning that blue ocean red again.
okay, let's break that down. Step one, buyer utility. How do you assess that systematically? It feels subjective.
It can feel subjective, which is why we developed a tool called the Buyer Utility Map. It
Yeah.
helps make it more objective. It outlines 6 stages of what we call the buyer experience cycle.
6 stages, like what?
Purchase, delivery, use, supplements, things needed to use the product, maintenance, and finally, disposal.
Okay, the whole life cycle.
Right. And then it maps these against 6 utility levers, ways you can deliver value. Things like customer productivity, simplicity, convenience, risk reduction, fun and image, and environmental friendliness.
This is like a grid.
Exactly, a
Okay.
36-cell grid. The idea is to use this map to see where your proposed offering delivers utility, but more importantly, where the existing industry offerings might be failing, leaving utility blocks untouched. Where are the biggest blocks to utility for buyers?
Can you give an example, like the Ford Model T?
Perfect example. Before the Model T, there were over 500 automakers in the US, mostly making custom-built luxury cars for the wealthy. They competed mainly on the fun and image lever in the use stage, status symbols.
Right. But the Model T wasn't about status.
Not at all. Ford used the Model T to fill massive, previously ignored utility blocks for the mass market. Think about the convenience lever in the use stage. Roads back then were terrible, mostly unpaved, muddy tracks. Luxury cars couldn't handle them well. The Model T was designed to be rugged, reliable, high clearance. It could go almost anywhere. That was a huge convenience leap.
Okay. And what about maintenance?
Another huge block filled. Luxury cars were complex, broke down often, and were expensive to fix, needing specialized mechanics that were scarce outside big cities. This created huge risk and inconvenience in the maintenance stage. The Model T, by contrast, was designed for simplicity and standardization. Interchangeable parts, easy for owners, even farmers, to repair themselves with basic tools, cheap and reliable.
So it removed major risks and hassles the existing industry ignored.
Exactly. By consciously targeting and filling those significant utility blocks related to convenience and risk in use and maintenance, Ford made the automobile accessible and practical for everyday people, not just a toy for the rich.
Okay, so once you've confirmed exceptional buyer utility, step 2 is strategic pricing. This seems critical to avoid just pricing yourself back into a niche or a red ocean fight.
Absolutely critical. And the main challenge here, the key mindset shift, is to price your blue ocean offering against the alternatives that non-customers are currently using, often across different industries, not just pricing against the direct competitors within your own industry.
So who did Ford price the Model T against, not other cars?
No. If they'd priced it against other cars, which cost maybe $1,500 back then, it would have remained a luxury item. They priced it against the main alternative mode of transport for the masses, the horse-drawn carriage, which cost around $400, $500. Ford initially priced the Model T at $850, already much lower than other cars, and then relentlessly drove the price down over time, eventually reaching below the price of a carriage. That's what unlocked the mass market.
Pricing against the real alternative in the buyer's mind,
Yeah.
like Southwest Airlines.
Exactly. Southwest priced its short-haul flights against the cost of driving, not against the fares of other airlines like American or Delta. They targeted the huge mass market of people who traditionally drove long distances because flying was too expensive. This strategic pricing attracted hordes of new flyers.
And Swatch watches.
Same idea. They didn't price Swatch against traditional Swiss watches. They priced it around $40, making it an affordable fashion accessory, an impulse buy. People bought multiple Swatches. This price point was achievable because of their radical cost innovations, but it was strategically chosen to be accessible to the absolute mass market, a price point other watchmakers simply couldn't match profitably.
So it's about understanding what buyers are comparing you to, even if it's outside your industry, and pricing to capture the biggest possible slice of that demand, okay, which leads directly to step 3, target costing. You've set this ambitious strategic price. Now how do you make sure you can actually deliver it profitably?
This is where you have to be rigorous. Once you've set that strategic price needed to capture the mass market, you have to work backwards to determine the target cost you need to hit to ensure healthy profit margins. You can't let costs dictate price. Price has to dictate costs.
Easier said than done sometimes. How do companies achieve that?
It usually requires a combination of things. One is aggressive streamlining of processes and real cost innovations in how the product is made or the service delivered. Think of Ford's assembly line again. That wasn't just about speed, it was a massive cost innovation. It cut the time to assemble a Model T from 21 days down to just 4 days, reducing labor hours per car by something like 60%. That was essential to hitting their target cost and price.
And Swatch.
Swatch achieved a cost structure estimated to be 30% lower than any other watch company at the time through radical simplification of the watch mechanism, new materials, and automated assembly. That enabled them to profitably sell at that $40 strategic price point.
So internal efficiency and innovation are key.
Yeah.
But partnering plays a big role too, right? Like with IKEA or SAP you mentioned, it's not always just about doing it all yourself.
Absolutely. Smart partnering is often crucial for hitting ambitious target costs without massive upfront investment. IKEA is a master at this. They achieve their low costs partly by designing products for flat pack efficiency, but also by partnering with over 2,000 manufacturers in more than 50 countries, constantly seeking the lowest possible prices for materials and production while maintaining their quality standards. They leverage a global network.
And SAP, the business software giant.
SAP's Blue Ocean move into mid-market ERP software required hitting a much lower price point. They achieved their target cost partly through software innovation, but also through smart partnerships. They partnered with Oracle to use its world-class database, avoiding the cost of developing their own. And crucially, they partnered with major consulting firms like Capgemini and Accenture.
How did that help with costs?
It gave SAP instant access to global sales and implementation teams without having to build and pay for that massive infrastructure themselves. They leveraged their partners' existing networks and expertise, allowing them to reach the mid-market cost-effectively. It's about leveraging external capabilities to meet internal cost targets.
Fascinating. Okay, utility, price, cost. The final step in the sequence is adoption. Why is this so crucial? If you've nailed the first three, great product, great price, profitable cost, shouldn't people just flock to it?
You'd hope so, but reality is often more complicated. Even an unbeatable value proposition and business model can face significant hurdles if the new idea fundamentally threatens the status quo or provokes fear and resistance among key stakeholders.
Stakeholders like who?
Could be your own employees, who fear their skills will become obsolete or their jobs will change. It could be your business partners, suppliers, or distributors whose existing businesses might be disrupted. Or it could even be the general public if the idea is radically new or misunderstood. Failure to anticipate and address these adoption hurdles can kill a blue ocean strategy before it even gets going.
So you have to actively manage the human side of the change.
Actively, you need to engage in open dialogue, educate the fearful, explain the why behind the change, and build trust. Take Netflix's huge pivot from DVD by mail to streaming. That was a massive internal shift.
Right, potentially threatening to people comfortable with the old model.
Exactly. But they focused heavily on engaging their employees throughout the process, explaining the strategic necessity of the shift, investing in retraining, and communicating the vision. This helped ensure internal buy-in and alignment, which was crucial for navigating that difficult transition and ultimately achieving huge success in streaming. Without addressing those internal adoption hurdles, the whole thing could have easily derailed.
And what about external partners? That seems even trickier if your new strategy directly impacts their revenue.
It can be a real minefield, definitely. SAP faced exactly this challenge when they introduced Accelerated SAP, ASAP. This was a new, faster, lower-cost implementation methodology designed to make their software accessible to mid-sized and small companies, a huge blue ocean market for them.
Wow.
But it relied heavily on the cooperation with the big consulting firms, who made a significant portion of their revenue from the long, complex, expensive implementations of SAP software for large companies. ASAP potentially threatened that lucrative business.
So how did SAP overcome that resistance?
They addressed it head-on. They engaged in open discussions with their consulting partners, explaining the huge new market opportunity ASAP would unlock for everyone. They argued that while individual project fees might be smaller, the sheer volume of new clients in the mid-market would more than compensate for any potential loss of revenue from large enterprise projects. They also highlighted how ASA would help address growing customer concerns about long implementation times. They framed it as a win-win, but it required proactive communication, education, and directly addressing the partners' legitimate fears about cannibalization.
So again, it comes back to open discussion, anticipating resistance, and finding those win-win scenarios, especially when you're asking key stakeholders to fundamentally change how they operate. That seems like a perfect lead-in to the next crucial element, actually building execution into the strategy by overcoming those predictable organizational hurdles. Because, as we said, a great strategy on paper just isn't enough if the organization can't or won't execute it.
Exactly, and this is where the concept of tipping point leadership comes into play. It's based on the insight that in any organization, fundamental change can happen remarkably quickly when the beliefs and energies of a critical mass of people are engaged. You don't need to convert everyone at once.
Okay, tipping point. Like Malcolm Gladwell's idea.
Similar principle, yes, applied to organizational change. It argues that leaders can overcome the key hurdles to strategy, execution, cognitive, resource, motivational, and political quickly and at low cost by focusing their efforts on identifying and leveraging factors of disproportionate influence. It's about finding the levers that give you the biggest bang for your buck rather than trying to move the entire organization through sheer force or massive resource allocation.
Okay, let's unpack those four hurdles. First, the cognitive hurdle.
Hmm.
Getting people to agree on the need for a strategic shift. You mentioned the see to believe idea earlier with the visual awakening. How does tipping point leadership address this?
The core problem is that relying solely on numbers and abstract arguments often fails to convince people, especially if the need for change isn't immediately obvious in their day-to-day work. Numbers can be disputed, manipulated, or simply ignored. That data doesn't apply to my division.
Right. So how do you cut through that?
Tipping point leaders don't just present numbers. They make people experience the harsh reality firsthand, in a way that's undeniable and visceral. We talked about NYPD Commissioner Bill Bratton earlier. When he took over in the early 90s, NYC was facing a massive crime wave, morale was terrible, but his budget was frozen. Many senior officers were complacent or resistant to change.
So how did he break through that cognitive hurdle?
He didn't just show them crime statistics in meetings. He implemented what he called the electric sewer strategy. He made his senior staff, deputy commissioners, bureau chiefs ride the subway system, including through the most dangerous, graffiti-scarred, crime-ridden stations and lines, often late at night.
Wow, that must have been an eye-opener.
It was shocking for many of them, coming face to face with the fear, the decay, the open drug use. It made the grim reality completely inescapable. It shattered complacency and created a powerful, shared understanding of the urgent need for radical change in a way that no report or presentation ever could. They saw the problem.
Okay, so once people see the need for change, you hit the resource hurdle, especially if, like Breton, you don't have more money to throw at the problem. How do you achieve more with less?
The conventional thinking is that big changes require big resources, more budget, more people. Ticking point leaders challenge this assumption. They focus on concentrating resources on the areas that have the biggest performance impact and stripping resources away from areas that offer little return.
Finding the hot spots and cold spots.
Exactly. Breton asked two key questions. What activities consume our greatest resources but have scant performance impact, cold spots? And what activities have the greatest performance impact but are starved for resources, the hotspots?
And what did he find in the NYPD?
His analysis revealed, for instance, that the vast majority of subway crime occurred at just a few station hotspots, yet police resources were spread relatively evenly across the entire system, meaning those hotspots were actually resource-starved. Meanwhile, huge amounts of officer time, a major resource, were being consumed processing minor arrests through the courts, often taking 16 hours per case for petty offenses, a massive cold spot.
So what did he do?
He radically reallocated resources. He shifted officers away from low-crime areas and times, cold spots, and concentrated them intensely on the high-crime subway station hotspots, often using data to predict where crime would flare up next. He also streamlined the arrest processing system to free up thousands of officer hours previously wasted in court. He achieved a dramatic drop in crime without a budget increase simply by redirecting existing resources to where they mattered most.
That's powerful. Making the existing resources work smarter, not just harder. Okay, third hurdle, the motivation hurdle. How do you motivate the key players, and maybe the masses, to actually embrace and execute the new strategy quickly and without spending a fortune on bonuses or incentives?
Again, the traditional approach is often top-down, large-scale communication campaigns or complex incentive systems, which can be slow, costly, and often ineffective. Tipping point leaders take a more focused approach. They identify the kingpin.
Kingpins.
Yeah, the key influencers within the organization. These are people who have disproportionate influence due to their position, their control over resources, their reputation, or their connections. If you can motivate them, their influence will cascade down and motivate others.
So who were Bratton's kingpins in the NYPD?
For Bratton, it was the 76 precinct commanders. Each commanded between 200 and 400 officers. He realized that if he could get these 76 commanders fully committed to the new crime-fighting strategy, the change would ripple rapidly through the entire 36,000 officer force. Trying to motivate all 36,000 directly would be impossible.
Okay, so how did he motivate those 76 commanders? You mentioned placing them in a fishbowl.
Exactly. He implemented what he called fishbowl management through his now famous CompStat meetings. These were bi-weekly crime strategy meetings where precinct commanders had to stand up in front of their peers, their bosses, the borough chiefs, and the top brass, including Bratton himself.
High pressure.
Very high pressure. Huge computer-generated maps and charts were projected, visually displaying up-to-the-minute crime statistics for their specific precinct. Commanders had to explain their numbers, what was working, what wasn't, what strategies they were deploying to tackle crime hotspots identified by the data.
Public accountability.
Intense public accountability. Successes were praised, but failures or lack of progress were openly scrutinized. Nobody wanted to be the commander whose numbers were going the wrong way or who couldn't explain their strategy in front of all their colleagues and superiors. This transparency and peer pressure created a powerful, intrinsic motivator for commanders to embrace the new data-driven strategies and deliver results far more effectively than any memo or bonus scheme could have.
Wow, that's a clever use of transparency.
Right.
Okay, the final hurdle, the political hurdle. This is often the toughest, right? Dealing with internal resistance, turf wars, undermining from those who feel threatened by the change.
It's often where good strategies go to die, yes.
Yep.
You need to identify and silence potential detractors early on. Tipping point leaders actively cultivate influential allies or angels within the organization and identify their key opponents, or devils. They work to isolate the devils, often by building a broad coalition of support that includes the angels.
And how does fair process fit into neutralizing political resistance?
Fair process is absolutely crucial here. When people feel that the process used to make decisions and implement changes is fair, even if they don't love the outcome itself, they are far more likely to accept it and cooperate, rather than resist or sabotage.
What does fair process involve?
It typically involves three things: engagement, involving people in decisions that affect them, asking for their input; explanation, clearly explaining why decisions are made the way they are, the thinking behind them; and expectation clarity, making sure everyone understands the new rules, responsibilities, and standards.
So it builds trust and respect.
Exactly. It signals that leaders value employees' ideas and treat them with respect even when making difficult changes. We saw the contrast with Elco, the electrical components company. One plant, High Park, had a terrible reputation for union resistance, yet they successfully adopted a radical new manufacturing process. Why? Because management used fair process, they engaged the union, explained the competitive realities, involved workers in the redesign.
And the other plant?
The other plant, Chester, supposedly the model plant with a compliant union, failed to implement the same changes. Management there simply imposed the new process top-down, without explanation or input. The result: resentment, foot-dragging, even sabotage. Fair process wasn't just nice to have. It was essential for overcoming political resistance and ensuring execution.
That really drives home how critical the human elements are, beyond just the strategic logic or the numbers, which leads perfectly into the alignment barrier. This sounds like the key to making a blue ocean strategy truly sustainable over the long haul. How do you prevent it from just being a temporary success that fades away or gets copied instantly?
This is where everything really needs to come together. True, sustainable blue ocean strategy, we found, requires the alignment of three distinct but interconnected propositions.
Three propositions.
Yes. First, the value proposition. Does the offering deliver exceptional utility for buyers? Second, the profit proposition. Does the company have a viable business model to generate strong profits at the strategic price? And third, the people proposition. Are the internal and external stakeholders, employees, partners, etc., motivated and aligned to support and execute the strategy?
Value, profit, people. And they all need to be aligned.
Critically, yes. And not just aligned, but all three propositions must simultaneously pursue both differentiation and low cost. If any one of these propositions is weak, or if they're not aligned, the strategy becomes vulnerable and often unsustainable. Success is often short-lived.
So if you have a great value proposition for customers and a decent profit model, but your employees hate the new system or your key suppliers feel exploited, it's likely to fail.
Highly likely. Or at least it will be much easier for competitors to imitate or disrupt, because the foundation isn't solid across all three dimensions.
And you argue that imitation is much harder when all three are aligned.
Yes. Imitating a single product feature, value, or maybe a process innovation, profit, is often possible. But imitating a complex, integrated system where value, profit, and people strategies are all reinforcing each other, that's incredibly difficult. Especially the people proposition, which is often built on trust, relationships, and culture cultivated over time.
Yeah.
That creates a really formidable barrier to imitation that goes way beyond just patents or technology.
The contrast between Napster and iTunes seems like a perfect illustration of this alignment barrier or lack thereof.
Absolutely. Textbook case. Napster burst onto the scene, first mover advantage, millions and millions of users.
80 million at its peak, wasn't it?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah.
Huge. It clearly had a powerful value proposition for users.
Yeah.
Free music, anytime, anywhere. Massive utility.
Mhm.
But it completely failed on the other two propositions. It had no viable profit model. It was giving everything away for free. And its people proposition was disastrous. It fundamentally alienated its most crucial external stakeholders, the music companies and artists, by facilitating mass piracy. It actively destroyed value for them. So, despite the great value for users, the lack of alignment on profit and people meant it was inherently unsustainable and ultimately shut down by lawsuits.
Right. And iTunes, coming later, managed to align all three.
Apple masterfully created a set of fully developed and aligned strategy propositions. The value proposition for buyers was compelling. Legal, high quality, easy to find songs for 99 cents each, a la carte. Simple, convenient, fair.
Okay.
The people proposition was also strong. They secured agreements with the major music labels by offering them a significant cut, around 70% of each song purchase. This turned the labels from enemies into partners. It created a win-win.
Right, addressing the stakeholder issue Napster ignored.
And the profit proposition for Apple was multifaceted. While margins on song sales themselves might have been modest, iTunes became a massive driver for sales of Apple's high-margin iPods. The integrated ecosystem boosted hardware sales significantly. So Apple had strong, aligned propositions across value, people, and profit.
And that alignment created a sustainable blue ocean.
Exactly. It ushered in the era of legal digital music, allowed Apple to create, capture, and dominate that new market space for years. And that tightly integrated system, especially the relationship-based people proposition with the labels, was incredibly difficult for competitors to replicate quickly.
That makes so much sense. Okay, so you've created a blue ocean, you've lined value, profit, and people. Does it last forever, or is the work never really done? Do you need to keep seeking new blue oceans?
Unfortunately, no blue ocean stays blue forever. It's not a permanent state. Over time, as your success attracts attention, competitors will eventually try to imitate or find ways to encroach on your space. The waters inevitably start to turn red again as competition intensifies.
So you can't just rest on your laurels.
Absolutely not. To achieve sustained high growth, companies need to continuously monitor their position and be prepared to seek out and create new blue oceans. It requires a dynamic approach to strategy, a mindset of continuous renewal, not a one-and-done blockbuster mentality.
Like Salesforce.com, which you mentioned earlier, they didn't just stop with their initial web-based CRM success, even when they were dominating that space they created.
Exactly. They are a great example of continuous blue ocean creation. After competitors eventually started offering similar basic SaaS CRM tools, Salesforce didn't just fight harder in that now reddening ocean. They made successive blue ocean moves.
Like what?
They launched Force.com, which was essentially a platform as a service, PaaS, allowing companies and third-party developers to build their own custom applications on Salesforce's cloud infrastructure. Then came App Exchange, an online marketplace for these third-party apps, creating a whole ecosystem.
Expanding beyond just CRM.
Way beyond. Then they introduced Chatter, integrating social collaboration features into the platform. Each of these moves opened up new market space, attracted new types of customers, including large enterprises they initially didn't target, and added new layers of value and differentiation, keeping them ahead of the curve. They consistently innovated into new blue water.
And Apple, of course, is maybe the ultimate example of this serial blue ocean creation, almost constantly launching new game-changing products, sometimes even disrupting their own successful ones.
Apple, under Steve Jobs particularly, was a masterclass in this. Think about the sequence: iMac, then iPod, then the iTunes Store, then the iPhone, then the App Store, then the iPad. Each was a major blue ocean strategic move that redefined an existing market or created an entirely new one.
And they didn't wait for one to fully mature or decline before launching the next.
No. Even as one blue ocean, like the iPod, started facing intense imitation and commoditization, Apple was already launching variants to maintain its lead and simultaneously creating the next massive blue ocean, like the iPhone, which ultimately cannibalized much of the iPod's market but opened up something far larger.
So it's a portfolio approach almost.
It shows that successful companies, especially multi-business firms, really need to learn how to swim effectively in both red oceans and blue oceans simultaneously. You need red ocean strategies competing effectively, managing costs, fending off rivals for your established businesses once their blue oceans start turning red. But the real engine of profitable growth comes from continuously seeking out, creating, and executing on those new, uncontested blue ocean opportunities.
Okay, one final clarification seems important. You mentioned this briefly, but blue ocean strategy is not the same thing as creative destruction or disruption theory. They sound related, but there's a key difference, isn't there?
That's a really crucial point, and one that's often misunderstood. They are related in that both deal with innovation and market change, but they're distinct concepts. Creative destruction, the term coined by Schumpeter and popularized more recently by disruption theory, primarily focuses on innovations that displace an existing market or technology.
Like digital photography displacing film.
Exactly.
Uh,
Or Netflix streaming displacing blockbuster video stores. The new technology or business model comes in and essentially destroys the old one. It's often a zero-sum game initially, where the innovator wins by taking share directly from the incumbent.
Okay, so how is blue ocean strategy different?
Blue ocean strategy is a broader concept. While some blue oceans can be disruptive and displace incumbents, many, perhaps most, are not. The overriding emphasis in blue ocean strategy is on non-destructive creation.
Non-destructive creation.
Yes. It's about creating new demand, often by attracting previous non-customers into a market, rather than just fighting over existing customers or directly destroying an existing industry. It's about expanding the total market size, growing the pie for everyone, rather than just reslicing the existing pie. Think of Cirque du Soleil. It didn't really destroy the traditional circus. It created a new form of entertainment, primarily for adults who weren't going to the traditional circus anyway. It grew the overall entertainment market.
So it's more about market creation than market destruction.
That's a good way to put it. Blue ocean strategy encompasses disruptive innovation, but goes beyond it to include the creation of entirely new markets without necessarily displacing existing ones.
That's a really helpful distinction. Wow. This deep dive into blue ocean strategy has been incredibly illuminating. It really paints a clear picture of how companies can potentially escape that exhausting, cutthroat competition of red oceans and create these entirely new market spaces, achieving profitable, sustainable growth.
Yeah.
It really boils down to shifting focus away from just battling rivals towards looking at alternatives and non-customer.
Right, and using systematic tools like the 6 paths and the strategy canvas to identify those value innovations that deliver both differentiation and low cost simultaneously. It's about breaking that traditional trade-off.
And then, crucially, getting that strategic sequence right, ensuring exceptional buyer utility, nailing the strategic price, hitting the target cost, and overcoming the adoption hurdles.
And remembering that execution isn't just an afterthought, it has to be built into the strategy from the beginning by consciously overcoming those cognitive, resource, motivational, and political hurdles, often using tipping point leadership principles.
And finally, ensuring that holistic alignment across the value proposition for buyers, the profit proposition for the company, and that critical people proposition for all stakeholders, that seems to be the key to making it stick.
That integrated system is what creates true sustainability and makes imitation so difficult.
So, thinking about all this, what does it mean for you listening right now? As you look at your own industries, your own fields of work, where do you see those red oceans, those areas where returns are diminishing, where everyone seems to be fighting for the same scraps?
Yeah, where does it feel bloody?
Right. And then, maybe more importantly, based on what we've discussed,
Yeah.
what unrecognized alternatives or unmet needs among non-customers might be waiting out there? What could be transformed into a thriving blue ocean in your world?
Where do you think the biggest untapped demand truly lies? Maybe just beneath the surface, waiting for someone to look at things differently and discover it.
Something to definitely ponder as you navigate your own strategic waters.